Dogs may be man's best friend, but chimpanzees are closer to being actual relatives, and while with the latter there's a clear hierarchy, can primates' similarity to ourselves lead some to treat them as if they were human and forget a wild animal lies inside? This may have been the mistake made by the owner of Travis the chimpanzee, and it would be one that would have catastrophic consequences.
He ripped her face off!
He ripped her face off?
He's eating her! Please! God, no, please!
Welcome to Well I Never, and before we start I'd like to say a special hello to all of those first-time viewers. If you enjoy true crime, random facts and interesting snippets from history, you're in the right place because that's what we're all about. So please consider hitting the subscribe button. Now on with the show, and in today's episode we delve into the story of Travis the chimpanzee. In nature, chimpanzees can be found across Central and Western Africa. And it was from here that Coco, Travis's father, was taken sometime in the 1970s. From the wilds of Africa, he was brought to Festus, a small city in Jefferson County, Missouri. More specifically, his new home would be the Missouri Chimpanzee Sanctuary, owned by Mike and Connie Casey. A fellow inhabitant of the sanctuary was a chimp named Susie. Susie was a retired zoo chimpanzee, and in 1995 she was mated with Coco, with her giving birth on the 21st of October. 3 days later she was tranquilized and her newborn was taken from her and sold to Sandra Herold for $50,000. Sandra and her husband Jerry were self-made millionaires, owning several automotive businesses in Stamford, Connecticut. During the 1970s, however, the pair would travel from state to state so Sandy, and later her daughter Sue, could barrel race semi-professionally at various rodeos. It was during these days that Sandra would have two meetings that would have a massive impact on her future. The first of these was when she met and became good friends with a young woman, a runaway who was rodeoing her way across the country. Her name was Charla Nash. The pair became close and would remain good friends beyond their time on the road. It was also during a rodeo that Sandra would have her second fateful encounter. One of the attractions at this particular show was a chimpanzee dressed in cowboy gear who would ride a horse around the arena. Sandra was taken by the spectacle and sought out the chimpanzee and his owner backstage. She had taken some gummy bears with her, and the chimp gratefully received them. During his next show, he spotted Sandra and the audience, jumped from his horse and leapt into her arms. She was smitten. Fast forward to the 90s and the automotive business had become very successful, making the Herolds millionaires. But with her parents passing away and her only child moving out of state, Sandra felt there was something missing. She sought to plug that gap, and on October 21st, 1995, she received a phone call from Connie Casey stating, "Your baby has arrived. It's a boy." A few days later, and Sandra had in her arms a newborn chimpanzee, all fur, eyes and ears. She paid in cash, and with that, she finally had a chimp of her own, naming him Travis after one of her favorite singers, Travis Tritt. Once the pair had returned home to Stamford, Sandra and Jerry doted on the new member of the family. Travis would be bottle-fed, burped, and even put down for naps in his own crib in the Herald's bedroom. As he grew, the Heralds taught him to brush his teeth and even use the toilet. He also had his own wardrobe full of outfits that Sandra would dress him in every morning. By this point, it's sounding as though the Heralds, Sandra in particular, saw the new member of their family as a child substitute. But they weren't totally blind to the risk he may pose as he grew. They made many changes to their house to accommodate the growing Travis. A room towards the rear of the house was caged in with sliders leading to an outdoor enclosure. His bedroom also had a heavy lockable metal door so that Travis could have several rooms, including the outside enclosure where he could roam around freely if he was left on his own. They had also converted several rooms at their tow business, as Travis would often accompany them there, even riding out with them when going to pick up vehicles. By now, he had even learned to greet policemen they had passed along the way and often posed for photos. Travis quickly became a local celebrity, with many residents having some story about him. Sandra and Jerry would also take him to restaurants where his favourite foods were said to be filet mignon, lobster tail and ice cream. He was certainly a pampered primate. Things were going well, and Sue, Sandra's daughter, even returned to the town after splitting with her husband. This was a great time for Sandra. She and her daughter were very close, and she had returned with a son of her own. The pair would often spend time catching up while Travis and Sue's son Tyler played together. Sandra's good friend Charla would also visit, with Travis climbing all over her and messing with her long blonde hair. Sadly, these salad days wouldn't last long. Sue eventually found herself a new partner who Sandra didn't approve of, and tragically, one night while heading back to their new home, she was involved in a fatal car crash. This sent Sandra into a deep depression. Her only bright light now was Travis. He was growing fast, however, and had started a routine with Jerry where the pair would drink a glass of wine with dinner most nights. For the most part, though, Travis still seemed to be well behaved. This was until one night in 2003 when, while the trio were driving to the tow shop, they stopped at an intersection where someone threw an empty bottle into Travis's half-open window. He didn't like this at all. He unbuckled his seatbelt, opened the car door and ran out into the road. He stood surveying the area, then lunged at a passerby. He then lay on his back in the middle of the road and began rolling around. The cars began honking their horns, but Travis was having too much fun. He began climbing on cars and chased the police officers who responded to the incident. Each time they managed to lure him back into the car, he would open the door and jump out again. This continued for several hours before he started to tire. He then climbed in of his own accord and secured his seatbelt. Travis was well known to the police by this point, and they put it down to him just being playful, so no charges were brought. They escorted the Herolds home, and Travis spent the next day locked in his room, grounded. A couple of years prior, Travis's parents, Susie and Coco, along with a third chimp, had also escaped before going on a spree of their own. Theirs would have a more tragic outcome, however. The three primates began bouncing on a car full of teenagers as they pulled into their driveway. Playfully so, according to neighbours. Connie Casey arrived on the scene and managed to tranquilise Susie, who sat groggy on the front lawn. By then, however, one of the teens, Jason Coates, had run inside the house to get a gun. He came back outside, shotgun in hand, and despite Connie screaming at him not to shoot, he fired 3 times, killing Susie instantly. Back in Stamford, and Travis's escapades hadn't gone unnoticed by the State Department of Environmental Protection. They also noted that the Herolds were in violation of a new law that meant they would require a permit to own a primate weighing more than 50 pounds. Because of Travis's popularity in the town, they figured that pursuing any action would only paint them in a bad light, so they decided against pressing the issue. The animal control officer for Stamford had other worries though. She had been in touch with a primatologist to talk about the town's most famous resident and was told that Travis would now be approaching adulthood, and not only would he now have the strength of at least 5 men, but would become more unpredictable and potentially violent. The animal control officer contacted Sandra to let her know about the fears she had about Travis. Sandra seemed to take her worries on board, but told her that Travis had never exhibited even the slightest capacity for violence. In 2005, things would get worse for the Herolds. Jerry was diagnosed with stomach cancer in March, which led him to spending most of his time away from home in hospital. Jerry's absence seemed to have a profound effect on Travis, who grew despondent and seemingly depressed. He would frantically sniff at Sandra's clothes when she returned from visiting Jerry, and he would also lift his photos off the walls, pressing his lips to the glass. With his cancer spreading, Jerry told Sandra that they needed to talk about Travis and what she would do with him if he were to pass away. Despite how hard it would be, he urged her to send Travis to a sanctuary if the worst were to happen, as he was too much for one person to handle. On April 12th, Jerry passed away. Sandra fell deeper into her depression and stopped speaking to many of her friends. Travis also seemed to sink into a depressive state. A year after Jerry's death, Sandra wrote a letter that she planned to send to a woman in Florida who ran a chimpanzee sanctuary. In the letter, she described how Travis would still wait at the bedroom window, hoping for Jerry's return, and how she felt her and Travis were alone now. Her husband and only daughter both having passed away, and with her grandchildren living several states over, she had learned how fragile life was and worried that if something happened to her, what would happen to Travis? She wanted him to have someone to play with, for him to be with his own kind. She enclosed a donation of $250 and stated that she would be visiting soon so they could talk face to face. She never sent the letter and didn't make the trip. One person that Sandra had kept in touch with since Jerry's death was her longtime friend, Charla Nash. Charla had continued her nomadic lifestyle, with the closest she came to setting down roots being when she stayed at a homeless shelter for a year. She had a daughter now, however, and in an effort to help and perhaps find some company, Sandra allowed them to move into the apartment that the Herolds had built for their daughter. She allowed them to live there rent-free, with Charla also being given a job at the towing company. She would also tend the garden at Sandra's house and babysit Travis if she went out. By this point, Travis had not left the property for 4 years, with the now 14-year-old ape being very different to the small chimp the locals had become used to seeing. He stood at 5 feet tall and was massively overweight, weighing in at some 240 pounds. He spent the majority of his days eating junk food and watching TV. As a treat, and in an effort to raise Sandra's mood, she and Charla spent a weekend at a casino. But before heading there, the two had a pamper session, with Charla having her hair dyed red and curled. They returned on February 16th, Charla heading back to her apartment and Sandra home to Travis. She noticed that he seemed agitated and distant. He didn't seem interested in watching TV or take part in any of his usual activities. Instead, he grabbed a pair of car keys and ran around the cars in the yard, hoping to be taken out. Worried about his behavior, Sandra gave him a Xanax tablet, popping it into a mug of tea while he drank. Xanax is a short-acting tranquilizer, normally used to treat panic disorders and anxiety. Potential side effects include changes in behavior, loss of self-control, general confusion, and a feeling of unreality. Still ignoring Sandra's calls for him to come inside, she phoned Charla to tell her what was happening. The two women disagree on the next part, but Charla was either asked to come over by Sandra or volunteered to come over and help. Either way, it was a course of action that would have a massive impact for all involved. Arriving at Sandra's property around 3:40 p.m, Charla opened the iron gate and drove up to the front of the house. Getting out of her car and seeing Travis some 35 feet away, she picked up a red Elmo doll she had brought along with her and held it over her face playfully. For reasons unknown, upon seeing this, Travis flew into a rage and charged at Charla, his 240-pound knocking her into her car and to the ground, where he set upon her. Seeing this, Sandra screamed at him to stop, but to no avail. She grabbed a snow shovel and began to beat him with it, but he wouldn't stop. Charla, already a bloody mess, Travis biting, gnawing, and ripping her to pieces. Sandra ran back into the house to grab a knife, which she plunged into his back. Upon doing this, Travis stopped, turned to look Sandra in the face, then continued his brutal attack on her friend. Now also fearing for her own life, Sandra jumped into one of her cars, knife in hand, and made this fateful 911 call.
Stand for 911, where's your emergency?
This is Sandy. 241 Rock River Road.
What's the
Send
problem?
the police. Send the police.
What's the problem there?
The chimp killed my friend.
What's the problem with your friend?
Oh, please.
What's the problem with your friend? I need to know.
Send the police up with a gun. With a gun. He ripped her apart. Hurry up.
With a gun.
Hurry up, please.
There's someone on the way.
With guns, please. Shoot him.
What is the monkey doing? Tell me what the monkey's...
He ripped her face off.
He ripped her face off? Is the monkey still by your friend, or can you get close to your friend?
He's eating her. He's eating her. Please. God, no, please.
Okay, I need you to calm down for me. I know it's hard, okay? I know it's hard. But they're going as fast as they can your way, okay?
Oh, my God, please.
The call went on for 12 minutes. When the police arrived, they found Charla's body brutalised and soaked in blood. Travis was now roaming around the grounds, having ceased his attack. He walked up to the police car and smashed off its driver's side mirror. He managed to open the driver's side door, blood still dripping from his teeth. The officer inside managed to free his firearm and shot Travis 4 times. Travis staggered back, let out a scream, and ran off. The officer walked up to the body of Charla Nash, chunks of flesh and severed fingers strewn across the lawn. As he approached, Charla reached up to him with what remained of her arm. Following the trail of blood, they found Travis inside the property, dead. Charla's wounds were catastrophic. The crazed Travis had destroyed her face, tearing and biting away her eyelids, nose, jaw, lips, and most of her scalp. Every bone that made up her facial structure was broken. He had ripped off one of her hands entirely and destroyed most of the other. Her will to live was stronger, however, and she survived, but a long road of operations and rehabilitation lay ahead. As for Sandra, she was now truly alone. The only company she had was the hordes of journalists and news reporters at her door, hoping to get a scoop. One story the press were pushing that hurt Sandra the most was that she cared more for Travis than she did for Charla. Whatever she felt for Charla, it's clear that the loss of Travis had the biggest effect on Sandra. She refused to wash his blood away and bought a large toy chimpanzee that she sat in his favourite chair. Friends would contact her, but the conversation would normally end with Sandra in tears, recalling what had happened. Some also tried to get her back on the dating scene, but with little success. Sandra found it easier to connect with animals rather than people, be that horses, dogs, or even feeding the local raccoons and deer. But nothing could replace Travis. Sandra would try, however, and eventually ended up going halves on another baby chimpanzee. This one was named Chance, and knowing that she could never bring the primate back to her hometown, he would stay with her friend out of state. 15 months after the attack, however, Sandra suddenly suffered a ruptured aortic aneurysm and passed away. She is now buried alongside her husband Jerry. Inside her coffin lie 2 urns, one containing the ashes of her daughter Susan, the other those of Travis. As for Charla Nash, she was left blinded and severely deformed by the attack, and with her right thumb being the only part of her hands that could be saved. She has undergone a variety of experimental operations since her initial recovery, including a face and hand transplant. Sadly, the hand transplant failed, but Charla has been interviewed about her face transplant and remains in high spirits despite the tragedy that befell her. She says that she doesn't recall any of the attack and doesn't want to. She just wants to concentrate on moving forward and healing as much as she can. A sad tale for everyone involved, but Charla's determination and spirit after surviving such a horrific attack should serve as an inspiration for us all. Thank you for watching, and if you've a subject you'd like us to cover, drop us a comment below or head over to our Patreon page. Right then, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.